The silence after the resurrection was not peace. It was restraint. Heaven did not rush to end history because victory does not need haste. Christ had risen, death had been shattered, and authority had been reclaimed, but humanity was still being gathered. The story was no longer about proving who was God. That question had been answered. Now it was about who would listen. Satan knew this. He felt the shift the moment the stone rolled away. Something ancient broke that day, something he had relied on since Eden. Death was no longer his leverage. Fear was no longer absolute. Hope, real hope, had entered the world, and hope was dangerous. He had lost the power to destroy outright, so he refined the art of delay. If souls could not be conquered by force, they could be softened by comfort. If truth could not be erased, it could be buried under distraction. And so the long game began. He whispered to generations not to deny God, but to postpone him. Tomorrow became the most effective lie ever told. Tomorrow to repent. Tomorrow to obey. Tomorrow to choose. And tomorrow stretched into a lifetime. The world kept moving. Cities grew. Knowledge expanded. Humanity learned how to shape matter, command energy, and explore the heavens, yet remained unable to govern the heart. The same violence that filled the earth before the flood simply changed clothing. War learned strategy. Pride learned education. Greed learned finance. Sin learned how to appear civilized. And Satan watched it all with patience. He no longer needed temples or sacrifices. He needed hearts convinced they were sufficient on their own. He needed a world that believed morality was flexible, truth was personal, and God was optional. And still, God spoke, not with thunder, not with fire, but with invitation, through broken people restored, through lives transformed quietly, steadily, undeniably, through forgiveness where revenge was expected, through faith that endured suffering without bitterness. The kingdom of God advanced not like an army, but like yeast, unnoticed, unstoppable. This infuriated Satan, because every soul rescued was proof that the cross still worked. Every act of obedience was a reminder that free will, when aligned with God, became unbreakable. So he targeted unity. If believers could not be silenced, they could be divided. Doctrine fractured. Pride entered leadership. Love cooled under arguments. The body that was meant to move as one began to limp under its own weight. And yet, even in division, God preserved truth. Always a remnant, always a witness, always a light. History marched forward, and prophecy quietly aligned. What had been written centuries before began to cast long shadows into the present. Nations shifted. Power centralized. Truth became negotiable on a global scale. Humanity built systems capable of controlling commerce, movement, and identity, without realizing they were rehearsing for something darker. Satan did not invent the final rebellion. He only prepared humanity to accept it. He would not come first as a tyrant. He would come as a solution. A world exhausted by chaos would beg for order. A generation drowning in information would crave simplicity. A society fractured by endless choice would surrender freedom for stability. And Satan would smile. Because control has always disguised itself as peace. But heaven had already spoken of this moment. There would come a time when deception would feel logical, when lies would sound compassionate, when obedience to God would be labeled dangerous, when righteousness would be treated as intolerance. And still, God would call. Not everyone would answer. Just as in Noah's day, the warning would be clear, the signs visible, the truth available. But most would continue building lives on sand, convinced the storm would never come, until it did. The end would not arrive as chaos first, but as decision. Lines would be drawn not by swords, but by allegiance. Humanity would be asked, not forced, to choose who it trusted, who it followed, who it obeyed. And Satan would finally overplay his hand. Because deception can only imitate truth for so long. When Christ returns, he will not come as suffering servant. He will not come hidden. He will not come vulnerable. Heaven will open, not to debate, but to conclude. And Satan knows this. He knows the war has an ending. He knows his fall was not the tragedy. The judgment is. He knows his time is measured, numbered, sealed. So he rages. He accelerates deception. He intensifies pressure. He targets the young, the weary, the uncertain. He whispers the same lie he has always whispered: God is holding you back. But the cross stands as eternal contradiction. God did not withhold himself. He gave himself. And the story will end the same way it began. Not with rebellion, but with obedience. Not with pride, but with surrender. Not with darkness winning, but with light revealing everything it ever tried to hide. And when the final door closes, it will not be sudden. It will be deserved. Time moves differently when eternity watches. Generations rise and fall as if unaware they are rehearsing for the final act. Kings, empires, ideologies, each a stage for the invisible war. Satan does not need to destroy humanity outright. He only needs to convince it that God is optional, that morality is negotiable, that freedom is found in defiance. And the subtlety is exquisite. By the time rebellion becomes obvious, loyalty has already hardened into compromise. The world calls compromise wisdom. Heaven calls it treason. Prophets rose, their voices like flares in darkness. Some were ignored, some were ridiculed, some were murdered, their blood a silent testimony that truth cannot be silenced, only postponed. Yet even in persecution, obedience persisted. Faithful souls appeared in every era, quietly resisting the tide, proving that no rebellion, even as potent as Satan's, can extinguish God's plan entirely. Satan adapted. He realized that armies of angels could not sway humanity as they had once swayed the celestial host. He had learned, direct confrontation invites defeat. Subtlety, patience, and deception are far more effective. Instead of appearing as the accuser, he became the advisor. Instead of showing his teeth, he whispered in the minds of rulers, influencers, teachers. He positioned himself as pragmatism, as reason, as the voice of caution when God calls for courage. Wars erupted, nations fell, wealth corrupted souls, science uncovered secrets, but wisdom often lagged behind knowledge. Humanity's hubris mimicked the pride of the fallen angel. The closer people drew to their own understanding, the further they moved from God. And Satan rejoiced, not in the catastrophe itself, but in the illusion of autonomy. When humans believe they are self-sufficient, their fall becomes inevitable. But God did not relent. Every generation bore witnesses: teachers, leaders, mothers, fathers, martyrs, ordinary humans living extraordinary faith. These were the planks in the spiritual ark, the preservation of hope amid the flood of human corruption. The ark of salvation no longer stood in a single vessel of wood, but in the collective obedience of those who chose God over comfort, truth over consensus, life over death. And Satan was enraged by the steadfastness of even a few. He could manipulate crowds, deceive nations, and corrupt systems, but the individual soul, when surrendered to God, remained untouchable. That was the lesson he could never master, the truth that gnawed at the brilliance of his fallen mind. One obedient soul could undo centuries of deceit. One act of faith could unravel empires built on sin. One whispered prayer could pierce the veil between heaven and earth and bring a torrent of mercy that no deception could counter. The world accelerated toward a precipice. Technology multiplied power, but not wisdom. Knowledge amplified ambition, but not obedience. Pleasure became endless, yet satisfaction never arrived. Humanity had mastered creation in part, but failed to master its own heart. And in this fertile ground of distraction and desire, Satan thrived. He whispered into the ears of the proud, the brilliant, the wealthy, the influential, "You do not need God. You are sufficient. You are the measure of all things." Yet even in his apparent triumph, cracks appeared. Small acts of mercy, unnoticed by the world, began to illuminate darkness. People gave sacrificially, forgave without repayment, walked humbly in their private devotion. These acts, seemingly inconsequential to the masses, were the secret forces that sustained the spiritual continuum. Every soul choosing God over self became a testament, an invisible ark of protection against the storm that was steadily rising. And the storm was rising. Natural disasters, wars, famines, plagues, moral collapse, they were not signs of chaos uncontrolled. They were the shadows of a world confronting the judgment it had long ignored. God's patience had extended far beyond human comprehension. Mercy had delayed the inevitable, but all delay has a limit. Every warning had been given. Every prophet had spoken. Every sign had been displayed. And still, the majority chose rebellion. And then, the stage of history shifted closer to climax. The lines between truth and deception blurred almost entirely. Leaders who once spoke boldly of justice began to compromise for popularity. Religions that once emphasized obedience now championed tolerance at the cost of conviction. Every system that had been intended to protect humanity became a vessel of distraction. The world was louder, faster, more intricate, and yet more spiritually deaf than ever before. Satan observed it with anticipation. He had prepared every subtlety, every distraction, every deception. He had orchestrated the illusion that autonomy equated freedom, that self-reliance equated wisdom, that rebellion equated progress. Every generation, every century, every empire was merely a rehearsal for the final moment of confrontation between obedience and defiance, faith and pride, salvation and ruin. And yet, he underestimated God, because God's power does not rely on spectacle or speed. God's plan transcends time, and his patience is meticulous. Every soul redeemed, every act of mercy, every whisper of truth, every generation that turns toward him, even in small numbers, expands the spiritual arc. These souls are invisible pillars in eternity, unnoticed by the world, but fully seen by heaven. And one day, when the appointed hour arrives, the doors of salvation will remain open to those who have chosen faithfully. Satan cannot close them. He can only attempt to block the view. He can only attempt to silence the call. He can only tempt humanity to delay, but he cannot override choice. And time marches forward. The world continues to spin. Empires rise and fall. The human heart continues to oscillate between devotion and rebellion, and the whispers of heaven remain. Return, obey, choose life. The parallels to Noah's days become undeniable. Civilization thrives in distraction, yet disaster is poised on the horizon. People laugh, build, celebrate, and dismiss warnings as superstition. Comfort seduces attention. Knowledge fuels pride. Obedience becomes inconvenient. And everywhere, Satan positions himself as advisor, confidant, and strategist, confident in the inevitability of delay. Yet, just as the flood once revealed the faithful remnant in Noah and his family, God will reveal the faithful in this age. The ark is not wood, it is Christ. The door is not physical, it is spiritual. The call is not to escape water, but to live under God's authority, to obey His commands, to trust His promises, to walk in faith while surrounded by rebellion. History accelerates toward that day. The storm clouds gather. The winds of deception blow with unprecedented force. The waters of chaos rise, threatening to engulf every soul invested in self and worldliness. And Satan, with all his cunning, readies his final strategies. He whispers, he divides, he deceives, he tempts, he corrupts. He uses the masses, the influential, the powerful, the brilliant, all to accomplish one goal: prevent humanity from choosing God freely and persistently. But God does not panic. He does not act hastily. He does not coerce. The ark remains open. The call is still sounded. Salvation is still accessible. And the contrast between obedience and rebellion becomes ever more pronounced. Those who listen are guided quietly by the Spirit. Those who delay are left to the natural consequences of their choices. And the final separation, the spiritual closing of the door, draws ever closer. Satan sees the coming reality. He sees the closing of the door. He sees the end of his opportunity. He rages, he conspires, he escalates deception. He unleashes every tool, every strategy, every manipulation ever conceived in his fallen mind. And yet, every act of faith, no matter how small, counteracts him. Every obedient heart resists his influence. Every prayer that reaches heaven pierces the darkness he has cultivated for centuries. And then the day will come. Not for panic, not for debate, not for negotiation. The final moment will arrive. The door will close. The ark, Christ, will remain. Judgment will separate obedience from rebellion, life from death, mercy from rejection. And the eternal consequences of rebellion, of pride, of denial, will be fully realized. Satan will not triumph. He will only expose the inevitable. His failure will be undeniable. His rebellion fully manifest. His fall complete. And yet, even then, he rages. Even then, he deceives. Even then, he whispers in the hearts of the unredeemed, "You are sufficient. You can choose later. God is distant. You are free." But those who have chosen Christ will see him for what he truly is: a defeated enemy, powerless before God, a shadow fleeing from the light, a fallen one who can no longer claim dominion over those who follow the Creator faithfully. History, the cosmos, humanity, and even heaven itself anticipate the climax. The final judgment is not about proving God's sovereignty. It has already been proven. It is about humanity's response, about the alignment of will, about the consequences of choice. And just as in the days of Noah, the majority may dismiss the warning, may mock the obedient, may embrace delay, but the door of salvation remains open until God Himself closes it. And when it closes, the world will finally recognize the reality of eternity, the victory of Christ, the defeat of Satan, the endurance of faith, the imperative of obedience. The story that began with a whisper in heaven, the first rebellion, the fall of the angels, the rise of humanity, the flood, the cross, the resurrection, will reach its appointed conclusion. And every soul will stand at the threshold, confronted with the ultimate question: did you walk with God? Will you enter the ark of salvation, or remain in the waters of rebellion? Time, patience, mercy, they have all been extended. History is the arena, humanity is the witness, and eternity waits. The heavens did not collapse when Lucifer fell. God did not lose his throne. Light did not dim. Heaven remained secure. The rebellion ended the moment it began, not because Satan was weak, but because God is unchallenged. Lucifer fell from the heights, not as a ruler dethroned, but as a servant who forgot his place. And yet, his fall did not end the story. It moved the battlefield. The war that began in heaven came to earth, not with armies, but with deception. The same pride that cast him down would be offered to humanity. The same lie that corrupted angels would be whispered in a garden. You can be like God. But here is the truth Lucifer could never accept. God does not lose what rebels against him. He redeems what humbles itself before him. Where Satan fell through pride, Christ triumphed through obedience. Where Lucifer sought a throne, Jesus chose a cross. And because of that, the fall of Lucifer is not a warning without hope. It is a reminder that pride still destroys, that rebellion still deceives, but that God's authority still stands. Satan's fall was not the rise of darkness. It was the beginning of its defeat. And the same God who cast him down will one day silence him forever. Light will remain. Truth will